Mr. Jason Webb is a community and technical assistance principal, and he's worked in this industry for over 30 years in community organizing and revitalization. He has instrumental in revitalizing the community of Roxbury, Massachusetts, called Dudley. And you can look at one of the award-winning documentaries that's highlighting his work in a documentary called Holding Ground, Gaining Ground, and in the book called Streets of Hope. So he's got a whole lot more information and a wealth of knowledge and expertise on this subject, but he's here with us today, and we want to give him a hand of appreciation and let him know we appreciate him taking the time to bring this information to us. Thank you, Jason.
All right, thank you all. Can everybody hear me? Yes, perfect. The dual technology with also being in person is also brand new for me. And this is actually my last stop, as I just finished actually working in 5 other communities over the past 2 months. So for me, this is also very personal in terms of the work that I do. One is I was able to help my own community. And because of that, now I want to share some of those experiences with as many people as possible. But we're going to dive into this. And again, just a brief intro for everyone. Jason Webb. I currently serve as the Community and Technical Assistance Principal at an organization called Grounded Solutions Network. Grounded Solutions, we're a national membership-based nonprofit that really specializes in working with communities to bring not just affordable housing, but permanent affordable housing solutions. So I've been doing this work for quite some time. I started off incredibly young, probably not as young as one of our members back there, but I started at the age of 7. And I got a calling to, go into my own community and to try to help. And I spent 25 years revitalizing my own community through this model that I'm going to be sharing with you today. Here's a little bit more about Grounded Solutions Network. We predominantly work here in the United States. Currently, right now, I'm working in about 32 other communities throughout the US. Unpacking these conversations and really listening to residents about what are your concerns. This is a model that's not for everybody. I'll be very much upfront with that, but it is a model that has transformed communities all throughout the United States. Where I love to start with this conversation is always talking about the roots. Where did this model come from? And one of the things that I wanted to set the stage is that this model is 53 years old. So it's a relatively young model. And one of the things that we're always trying to say to groups is understand the roots of it, and then you'll understand why certain decisions were made about the model. But where we're going to start There we go. So where we're going to start is 53 years ago, why were they even thinking about a community land trust? And I've asked somebody to actually come in and give us a little bit of context as to why this model exists.
There were many African Americans who were sharecroppers and tenant farmers in Georgia, in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Tennessee. And when they attempted to register to vote, they were forced off of the land.
So this is the great late John Lewis that is starting to set the stage as to why this model started to get traction. That a number of these farmers were farming on somebody else's land and not their own land. So here is a simple tracing of the roots of the community land trust. And one of the things that is important about this, this image here is the fact that this community land trust model has touched a number of other movements here in the United States and also in the world. So when you see on this sort of diagram, you see the single tax movement, you see the civil rights movement, you see the US peace movement, you also see the Grand Dame movement. All of these movements have actually touched this model and has actually made it stronger. Now, where we're going to go next is to actually hear from one of our founders as to what were some of the struggles of the reason why they wanted to create a community land trust.
I woke up this morning in my mind. Stay on freedom. I woke up this morning in my mind.
I was canvassing on the plantation. I knocked on the door of a man and his wife. They promised me they'd come to the mass meeting. They comes to the church with their 5 children. They told me that they had been kicked off the plantation, had nowhere to go for the night. How many people whose doors I've knocked on got kicked out of their homes with their children, without a job? And I was partially the cause of it. So I lived in deep guilt and frustration. So that's how the spark of the need for land came to me. Seeing the land, just the land itself, the beauty of the land, the purity of the land, and the acknowledgement that all power comes from the land, and the land comes from God. All power comes from the land. Absolute power comes from God. And that's my ministry. It's still my ministry.
That is a message from actually now the late Charles Sherrod. Unfortunately, we lost him this previous year. But these were some of the things that really compelled and really propelled these individuals to try to do something different, to look for a different land tenureship. Where this really started was actually in 1968. This American delegation went over to Israel. And they were going over to Israel with a certain purpose. They wanted to try to find a new type of land ownership model. And they were so impressed about the Musha model that incorporated leased land with cooperative farming and homes on it. And they were so impressed about this model that they actually were able to take some of the legal agreements that were between these individuals over in Israel and brought them back to the United States. And they said, wait a minute, we may have found something. Now we just have to figure out how to make it work with inside the systems here in the United States. Now, they also realized that if you were going to create something that was going to shake up land tenureship and land ownership, that you needed to bring together a broad coalition of individuals that would be thinking about what would be some of the backlash of collectively owning land. And especially for some of these civil rights leaders, they also understood through their organizing methods that they also needed allies to be able to create something new outside of what was the norm. In 1969, the first community land trust was incorporated here inside the United States, called New Communities Incorporated. New Communities Incorporated was the first ever community land trust that was really initially focused on agriculture. They wanted to bring together a number of the farmers that were being pushed off of land that wasn't theirs and invited them into a collective ownership of land. Now, New Communities Incorporated also got started with over 6,000 acres of land. In 1969, New Communities Incorporated was the largest Black-owned farm in the United States. And it was one of those bellwethers, it was one of those guiding lights of a message that we can actually own things together and actually move ahead. Now, in the 1970s, this motto quickly had to go ahead and take some turns, because one of the things that folks realized was, wait a minute, we can actually collectively own land together and do things with it. So in 1970, the first urban community land trust was actually created. And the model started to get tweaked a little bit, because instead of just farmers being on the governance board and being members of the organization, bringing it into the urban context allowed for the entire community to be involved. The first community land trust for an urban setting was set up right outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was actually set up because this community was actually in danger of being displaced by the development of downtown. In 1980, the community land trust started to take more traction. And as what the video talked about with inside Burlington, Vermont, and also with inside Albuquerque, New Mexico, municipal government started to get involved and started to figure out, how can we support this? Now, I come from Boston, Massachusetts, and that's Dudley Neighbors Incorporated. And our city probably did the most radical thing that they could do to support our community land trust. They gave our community land trust the power of eminent domain. And we're still the only nonprofit organization in the entire country that is able to hold that power. And we held that power because in our community, 30 acres of land was left vacant when white flight and arson for profit was happening in the 70s and 80s. And it left our community devastated, where you would literally just walk block after block after block of nothing but vacant land. And when we got our community land trust started, one of the things that we realized is that we needed to get land, and we needed to get control of land really, really quickly. Because even though our community was devastated, where you could buy a piece of land for $100, we knew that that wasn't going to be the norm in the future, because our community was only 1.5 miles away from downtown Boston, from that financial district. So we organized and we pressured the city to give us that power, and we were able to do amazing things with it. So in the 80s, we started to see a lot of municipal support for this model now. Now, also in the 80s, one of the things that happened is that we had somewhat of a death blow. That, you know, our bellwether, our guiding light for this model, New Communities Incorporated, actually lost all 6,000 acres of their land. Now, New Communities Incorporated was built and guided by visionaries. They were built by individuals that wouldn't say no. But one of the things that New Communities could not get away from was the racist policies within inside of Georgia. Now, because New Communities Incorporated was predominantly about agriculture, and one of the things that New Communities and all farmers had to deal with were maybe years of drought. But unlike their white counterparts, the government was quick to come in with 0% and very low interest loans to keep their operations going. When New Communities Incorporated also went and tried to get some of those loans, they were denied. Their paperwork went missing. Folks wouldn't return their calls. One conversation with actually the governor of Georgia that Charles Sherrod recounts is asking him, why can't we get this loan? And the governor of Georgia at the time told Mr. Sherrod, you'll get that loan over my dead body. So unfortunately, New Communities, Inc. had to give up all of their land because they just could not continue to operate. But that's not where the story ends, because 10 years after they lost their land, New Communities, Inc. actually filed with a joint civil action lawsuit against the state of Georgia and the federal government. And it became very clear that these practices were happening, that, you know, they had a very strong case. And the federal government went ahead and settled with New Communities Incorporated for $12 million. Now, after getting a settlement like that, you could easily say, hey, we've done the good fight. We're ready to retire. We're ready to we won, great, we're ready to move on. But no, New Communities, Inc. went out and actually bought more land because they realized that their vision was not yet achieved. Now, New Communities, Inc. actually bought a 1,600-acre parcel. And actually on this property, it was a former plantation. And the leaders of New Communities were very clear as to the reason why they wanted to buy this property. Now, this property here was actually owned by the richest individual within inside the state of Georgia. It was also a plantation that had over 100 slaves at one point on it. So the descendants of slaves wanted to send another message to say, no, 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 we're going to buy your property and we're going to actually fulfill our vision around collective ownership and prosper as a people. So New Communities, Inc. right now, and here's Shirley Sherrod, they have this center now that is still a working farm, but is also a conference center. They also have a strategic partnership with Airbnb for vacation rentals. And I know that in the news, some folks saw that as controversial, but they're very clear. They're like, no, we got a beautiful piece of property. We want people to come out and learn about the history of what happened on this property. So New Communities, Inc. is back, and some folks would say that it's better than ever. Now, our founders were very clear about this model. And this is something that I talk very frequently about, especially when I work with other nonprofits. Our founders saw what other nonprofits were doing and said, we don't want to just replicate what all other nonprofits do. We want to be true to this definition that talks about the Community Land Trust is a democratically structured nonprofit that has an open membership, and the board of directors is elected by that membership. They wanted to make sure that there was some accountability. They wanted to make sure that the decision makers were the individuals that they were trying to serve. So this is what is the definition that our founders call for this model. Now, membership within inside the community land trust has a lot of weight. A member can easily be able to approve the bylaws. If there needs to be changes in this resale formula, and we'll go over what that is. If the land trust needs to dispose of land or assets, it's not just up to the board, it's not just up to staff, it's up to the membership to really make that call. And then, God forbid, if the organization needs to dissolve, it's up to the members in the community to really say, yeah, no, it's time for us to give it up. Membership has a lot of weight within inside of this model. Now, I know in the documentary, it talked about that there's 200 community land trusts. Well, that's grown. We're about to finish our, what we consider to be our CLT census. We try to do it every 10 years. And as of last count, there's over 315 community land trusts here in the United States. We've seen amazing growth in actually the 90s and currently right now. We're seeing that folks are actually understanding that some of the policies that they've put in place around affordable housing in the past hasn't necessarily worked. It's more affordable financing rather than affordable housing. So they're looking for new ways to try to figure out how can we support something. Anything that you can do on real estate, you can do on a community land trust. The reason why this model works so well and the reason why it is legally available is because in real estate itself, and most commercial real estate works on ground leases. You guys all have McDonald's here, right? Now, McDonald's, great fast food chain, a lot of money. They don't really make their money on burgers and fries. The corporation makes their money on the real estate. Because what they do is they ground lease that real estate out to the franchise owners. Same way that we're trying to ground lease to protect the community. There are a number in the commercial realm use ground leases to make a lot of money. Walmart's another large sort of corporation that only uses ground leases. They don't own most of their stores. They ground lease it all. In their business mind, it's easier to close a store and to move on if you don't necessarily own it. These are some of the things that our founders looked at and said, wait a minute, this is allowed by law. Why can't we do it for home ownership, and why can't we protect our community with it? So what I'm going to go through right now are just some of the basics of the community land trust model. And then being cautious of time, and I know I have my team here that will give me some signals. Because, you know, unfortunately, I can be a preacher sometimes, and once you give me a mic, I can keep going. But I want to respect everybody's time. So, again, the community land trust as a model, its purpose is to acquire, own, and very importantly, steward land permanently for the common good. As what I just said, community land trust can do anything you want on real estate. And I've been blessed enough in my career to be able to do it all. I've done single family housing. I've done cooperative units, rental, condos, commercial, agricultural, open space. Anything you can do, you can put onto a community land trust. Because at the end of the day, the community land trust is about two things. One, it's about power. Who gets to make the decisions? Is it folks from the outside, or is it the actual community? And second, how do we protect what we want in our community? Those are the two major things that make up this community land trust model. Who gets to make the decisions and how can we protect it for the longest term? Now, our founders were very clear about our core elements. You need each one of these to be a community land trust. This is what they envisioned, is that membership and governance was key. It's one of the reasons why they put the C in CLT. They wanted to make sure the community was at its center. The second is about holding land and subsidy in trust. And this third thing is about stewardship. And we'll go over what each one of these sort of look like. But first is the idea of governance. So I've talked about this open membership, which on this slide is called a corporate membership. Community land trusts have a defined service area, could be a neighborhood, could be an entire city. There are some community land trusts that are trying to go statewide. I think when you go that big, you start to take a little bit of the community out of it, but you can get creative in how you make sure that community is still at the center. And then you have what's called this tripartite board of directors. Now, this tripartite board of directors from our founders were very clear that they wanted to make sure that they didn't just have regular community members be on the board, but folks that were actually leasing the land from them should have a seat on the board. And that actually those two of community members and leaseholders should make up the majority of the board. And then we'll bring in some public stakeholders to round it out. But this is where our founders said, this is democratically run, democratically controlled. It should go in the people's hands and they should be able to manage it. Now, the idea of dual ownership, and this is where sometimes I will lose people. The idea that you can own your structure, the improvements of the home, and the community land trust will own the land underneath your home. And some folks would be like, all right, Jay, I was with you, but you mean I don't own the land? I'm not sure if I can support that. And that's okay, because again, I've said, and I'll say it throughout this entire presentation, the community land trust model is not for everybody. But for the folks that have bought into it, as you saw in the documentary, it can change lives and entire communities. Now, a 99-year ground lease is what ties these two things together. It will tie the improvements and the land together. Now, this ground lease does three critical things. One, it outlines the rights and responsibility of the community land trust. Second, it outlines the rights and responsibilities of the homeowners. And then third, it outlines what's called resale restrictions. Now, resale restrictions are what set community land trust apart from all other forms of affordable housing. Resale restrictions will allow for the homeowner to take all of the equity that they have earned in their home when they leave. What it will limit you is the appreciation that has happened in the community. And we'll go over what those numbers look like in a moment. But this is where we're able to say, when we make a home permanently affordable, we do it once. We do it by lowering the price initially, because one of the things that community land trusts do, they work with inside their municipalities and governments to get taxpayer money to lower the price of the home. Our federal government in HUD gives to every city every year millions of dollars to create affordable home ownership. We will take those funds and we will lower the price of the home for this homeowner. If they can only afford X amount, we will try to figure out how to bring different subsidy pots to the table to make it so that they can actually purchase a home that they can afford. Second is that we deploy this resale restriction. So we will say to the homeowner, you will be able to sell your home for X amount of dollars. It will be different than where the market is. The purpose is to make sure that that home stays permanently affordable, not just for that homeowner, but for future homeowners as well. So we're able to take money and use it once instead of continuing to go back to the government and say, oh, we need more money to help this second family, this third family. No, give us the investment once and we'll recycle it for every family. And this is what we're trying to do. And this is the example here. So let's say in one of the communities in Indianapolis, market price of the home is $200,000. Now I know this may be low, but hopefully there is a place that has this type of scenario. But the family that we're trying to help can only afford a $155,000 price tag. So there's a $45,000 gap between what the market price of the home is and what the affordability that that family can actually afford. So this is traditionally called in all affordable housing circles, the affordability gap. It's the difference between where the market is and where our families can actually afford. Now, the sad thing is that the affordability gap never shrinks. It only grows over time. And what's even more sad is the fact that this affordability gap has actually grown so wide over these past few years, where the market prices of the homes are so much more higher than what our families can actually afford. And we would need an ever large pot of money to be able to close these gaps. Now, when I started to do this work was in the early 90s. At that time, we were only putting $50,000 to close this gap. In my community in Boston, Massachusetts right now, it's over $250,000 to close that gap. And it's primarily because wages do not track anything close to where the housing prices are and where the market prices are. So what the Community Land Trust continues to try to do is find that fair balance. We want to try to find a fair balance of giving folks the ability of homeownership. And we also want to give the community the affordable housing that it wants. We also want to give folks wealth building opportunities with the idea that we want to keep the affordability for as long as possible. We want to weigh the risk of homeownership, and there are some risks, with the rewards of homeownership. So as we think about this idea of subsidy and money that's going to go into this deal, one way that we can think about it is that in the affordable housing arena, there is a continuum of different strategies. And what's up on the screen right now is if you want asset building, and that is your number one goal, then there are some different strategies out there. There is what's called subsidy forgiveness. And I'll go over an example of that in a moment. If you want ongoing affordability as your number one goal, then it's more of affordable rental. And I would even say it's more like sort of public housing, affordable rental, if you're looking at that type. Where we try to come in is somewhere in the middle. Because we want folks to build assets, but we also want the affordability as well. So here is our numbers. And what we're going to go through right now, what I'm going to walk folks through is an example of a home that still has that same idea of that family that can only afford $155,000, but the market price of the home is $200,000. So we have a $45,000 gap. Now, in the traditional way of doing affordable housing, what we would do is, and if there's any folks from the city here, I say this all lovingly as you guys are bureaucrats. You guys will create a program called a down payment assistance program. Now, this down payment assistance program is widely known throughout the country. Most cities operate them, but they operate them in a subsidy forgiveness way. So the city will create this program that will come and fill this gap of $45,000. But one of the things that they'll do is they'll say to the homeowner, we need you to stay in the home for 10 years. And after 10 years, that $45,000 is yours. Now, 10 years later, this family is ready to go ahead and sell. The market in that community has gone up by $40,000. So that's the price that they can sell it. They walk away with $85,000. Now, they don't just walk away with $85,000. They walk away with an above market rate of return on their investment, because they don't just get the $40,000 that was the market appreciation, but they also get the $45,000 that the city put into the deal. Now, some folks might be like, yeah, this is great, $85,000, that's fantastic. But what happens to this next homeowner that we're trying to work with? So another family comes to us and says, hey, I want to buy this house, but the market price of the home has gone up to $240,000. Yes, their wages have gone up because now they can afford $185,000, but it would mean that we would need to come up with $55,000 new dollars to just help a second family. If this was the only way that we were going to do affordable housing, the printing press would need to be continuing to go. And honestly, we wouldn't really have any dent in the need for affordable housing, because for every house that you help is a house that you're going to lose. Let me say that again. For every household that you're going to help, there's a household that spent their 10 years and they're walking away, and that house now is market rate. There's no ability unless you bring more money to the deal. The community land trust works in a completely different way. So the community land trust model is set up where, again, as what I said to you, we lower the price initially. So instead of giving that $45,000 as a down payment assistance grant, we say to the city, give us the $45,000 and we'll write down the cost of construction. We'll actually lower the price of the home to match what that family can afford. We know that for a family, in terms of just their taxes, to be able to buy a $200,000 home versus $155,000 every year under the community land trust model, they'll be saving on their tax bill because we've wrote down that value of the property. So that's the first benefit, is the fact that because you're buying a home that you can actually afford, and that's what's calculated into the price, your tax structure is going to be a little bit different. Second, 10 years go by, the market pressures in the community are still the same. They go up to $240,000. But we put a resale restriction on this property that allows for the sale price to only be $185,000. Now, this sale price here, I calculated, and I created this example, is we created a resale formula that gave the individual 2% of appreciation every year that they were in the home. And I did this calculation based on where the income increases have been year after year. So I know that when I give you a $185,000 sale price, it's going to be able to help that next family. So this seller is able to walk away with $30,000. And that doesn't even include any principal pay down. that they've done on their mortgage. So it's a little bit more. Now, what happens with this second family? Second family comes along, they can only afford $185,000. Magically, or because of great program design, I like to say great program design, $185,000 is exactly what this family can afford. But it's because I created your resale formula based on where I saw income increases every year. So this outcome is actually not surprising at all. The idea of permanent affordability means that you're taking on permanent responsibility. Every community land trust stands in back of an agreement that says for 99 years, this home is going to be permanently affordable. Now, a lot of folks would say, why 99 years? 99 years is the legal limit of how long you can lease something before you give actual ownership to somebody. So we make that commitment, but we do stewardship in 3 specific ways. We do stewardship on the structures of the home. If the homes are to remain affordable, they need to remain in good condition. So community land trust will do things like workshops around seasonal maintenance on their homes. They'll create partnerships with Home Depot or Lowe's or Ace Hardware that will come in and do workshops with homeowners on how to actually repaint your porch. They will create, and some community land trusts, as what you saw with Durham, will create tool sharing, opportunities. They will help so that homeowners have the tools necessary to keep up their homes. The second thing that the community land trust steward are the homeowners. Now, I know from being in a community land trust and running one in the 2008-2009 foreclosure crisis and housing collapse, that there were a number of individuals running around promising amazing refinancing deals. And one of my homeowners that was on my community land trust came to me and said, hey, my neighbor just refinanced, my neighbor that's not on the community land trust just refinanced for $400,000. I can get that same deal. Dramatic effect. And one of the painful things that I had to say to them was, no, I'm sorry, you can't. You agreed that you could only sell the home for X amount. And one of the things that happened was she was really upset. She stormed out, called me a bunch of names, but I've been called worse. And unfortunately, I didn't see her for a whole year. She came back the next year and apologized and said that she now understood why the community land trust was so important. Because that neighbor that got that $400,000 refinance lost their home. Realized that there was, a teaser rate built into the mortgage. Then there was a balloon rate that was sort of put in there. There were all these things that made it so that her mortgage payment literally tripled within inside of a 6-month span. And they had to give up the home. So community land trusts help homeowners to make sure that all of the legal documents have another set of eyes on it. And lastly, we steward that subsidy. If we're saying to the government officials that your money is going to not just help one family, but multiple families, and for multiple generations, then we need to make sure that we're on top of our game with making constant that the rules are being followed, that people aren't refinancing for more than the value, that people are paying their mortgage. The other thing that is true about the community land trust model is that we have agreements with the banks under this model that give the community land trust extra time to work with you if you ever get in trouble with your mortgage. So let's say you lose your job and that mortgage payment is due. And yeah, you put some savings aside, so maybe you got that first month, but job market's tough. So the community land trust actually has an agreement with the bank that says that they can't accelerate their foreclosure for up to 120 days. Now, inside that 120 days, I can bet you that the community land trust is going to work with you on trying to figure out the best solution for you. And for some community land trusts, they'll even lend you the money, because we don't want anybody to lose their home. That's our whole purpose, is to keep community involved and also there. Here are just some of the ideas of how community land trusts have been able to do what's called stewardship, as what we talked about in the film Durham Community Land Trustees. Now, they wanted to make sure that their homeowners were taken care of with their taxes, but they also wanted to make sure that all the other neighbors were also taken care of. So it's not just their homeowners, but it's the entire community. It's the entire collective. Whether you live on a community land trust home or you don't, you could still walk in and get property tax relief help from them. Same thing with the other community land trust here. In Seattle, Washington, 2 community land trusts actually came together to do a homebuyer club. Let us collectively help support one another on this journey of home ownership. And then in Pima County, in Tucson, Arizona, during the height of the pandemic, they don't have any rental units as a part of their portfolio, but they teamed up with government to help the rest of their neighbors. This is what the community land trust does when it comes to helping out not just the homeowners, but the entire community. This right here is where stewardship can go above and beyond sometimes. Now, this comes from Indianapolis, Minnesota. And the homeowner here was actually in the hospital giving birth to her second child. A tornado ripped through her community, and this was what was left of her house. Now, a number of the females here can probably relate. You're in the hospital. You just gave birth. And you don't have a home to go back to. You actually don't even know that this has happened to your house. The Community Land Trust executive director actually went to this homeowner's hospital room, explained the situation, and said to her, "Don't worry, we got you. We got another house that we had on the market. We're actually going to pull it from the market. We want you to live in there for as long as you need to. And we, as the Community Land Trust, because we have the ownership of the land, we're going to advocate with the insurance company, with all of the other players like the contractors, to rebuild your house." This is what it means to be about community and work with community, is that you are there in the celebration, but you're also there when devastation happens. So we've been doing this for quite some time. And one of the things that we love to talk about is the fact that there are now over 30 years, we've had homeowners actually be in CLT homes. I've been blessed right before the pandemic to actually travel back to Boston, Massachusetts, and do a mortgage burning celebration with about 20 of the first homeowners that I helped to put into their homes. They now own their homes. They're able to start that generational wealth building now, which is amazing. But one of the things that we at Grounded Solutions did is we commissioned back in 2019 the largest comprehensive study of this field. And what does the numbers show? And here are some of the numbers that they talked about. So 95%, of these programs work with individuals and make sure that they're priced affordable, which means 30% of their monthly income for households earning 80% and less. 99%, and this is where the bankers love this number, of shared equity homes avoid foreclosure proceedings. Because again, you have a partner that's not going to want to have you fail. These are some of the supports that are built into this model. When it talks about wealth creation, now, the study looked at individuals that may have just come in with about $1,800 of money as maybe a down payment that they had to put into the property. And within 7 short years, they accumulated about $14,000 in equity. So for us, we now have a commissioned study that was actually done by a third party that looked at all the data that can actually show that there is wealth creation within inside of this model. Now, in terms of minority households, in the beginning, from 85 to 2000, there was only 13%. And that quickly got changed in the 5 years, where again, more minority households were actually going into these programs and actually getting more homeownership opportunities. Now, when we think about government, and I know it's sometimes a sensitive subject, especially for communities and for areas, thank you, that unfortunately the government has never actually come through with some of the promises that they've made over the years. But with community land trust, government does have a role. And these are some of the ways that governments have been able to help community land trust throughout the years. So they've been able to give startup funding. They are able to go ahead and ensure that there is a project pipeline. Every city owns property that they don't want. Vacant land, abandoned homes, they own these. They can easily turn those things over to a community land trust to continue the revitalization. They can bring in consultants like us to help communities actually see this through. They can have what's called funding for affordable housing, that federal money that governments get. Why don't you put it to a use that will actually recycle it instead of it just being a one single use type of funding?
We have 30 minutes left.
30 minutes left, great. So here are just some of the cities that have been able to work collectively with their governments. Now, whether that is through development agreements, tax agreements, staffing agreements, cities have been able to work with community land trust. And when you can do this, and this is from my own community, that right there in the front are duplex units, which is home ownership. In the back are threeplexes and fourplexes. That is a housing cooperative. So to put this in so many words, again, I always love to close with the fact that we have some core elements when we think about community land trust. We want to make sure that there's membership and governance. We want to make sure that we're holding the land in subsidy and trust. And then we want to make sure that we're focused on the stewardship, because no one can be a successful homeowner without some type of support. And within a community land trust, that's baked in. That's a part of the deal. You be a new homeowner with a community land trust, guess what? I want to come to those birthday parties. I want to come for Christmas dinner. And these are things that I personally have done. I've gone to homeowners' weddings. You know, I've been an extension now of the family, because that's what community is. So I'm going to stop there and ask, what are your questions? Yes, sir. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I'll definitely make sure that the documentary is Homes and Hands. It was published by New Day Films, and it is available out there. So, and the filmmakers are amazing. I know both of them personally, and they love to highlight this type of work. Oh.
Check.
List, oh, thank you. A list of cities. I'd just like to know who's close enough to come over and talk to us about,
Yeah,
you know, like you're around the corner and down the street or something like that. So is there a list? of
yeah,
those areas?
absolutely. There is a directory of community land trusts throughout the United States. And that directory is actually hosted by the Schumacher Society. And that is the society that was actually created from one of the founders, Bob Swan, who was one of the allies in creating New Communities Incorporated. The Schumacher Center, yeah.
Okay, so I have a quick question, and some people are scared to ask the serious questions, but I like to be very blunt. There is a lot going on in society. There's a lot going on with a lot of different people, a lot of different races that have to deal with like land and home ownership, dating back to as far as we can remember. And it touches base on a lot of issues that a certain sector of people have experienced. So I'm just lead into a few questions, okay? So one being that I heard you say that a woman in general was trying to finance her home when she found out somebody in the area had financed the home. So if that home, she was not able to finance it because she had signed that contract. So will the owners, the operators, or the investors stand to reap something even though she couldn't finance? Are they financing in between to capitalize off of that money that was not able to be retrieved by that homeowner because of the contract that was signed?
So are you talking about a CLT homeowner or not?
I am talking about a CLT homeowner
So
who has
C-
entered into an agreement
Yep.
with the community land trust to own a property for 99 years.
Absolutely. There are no investors.
Okay, so there has to be, okay, so we said stewardship, we said whoever's at the top, somebody's interacting with the government to receive those HUD fundings.
It's
Somebody's in control, not as much as the homeowner. So do they, that person at the top, those people, do they stand to reap some of the investments off of whenever there's financing available? So once something is set in stone, it's set in stone for all people across the board.
Yes, ma'am.
So any changes that are being made have to go through everybody that's involved in that trust. So it's more
Correct.
like a community operation moving together
Yes,
in
ma'am.
sync.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Another question that I have is that right now, there are a lot of, I must just say it, there are a lot of indigenous Aboriginal people here from North America, Turtle Island, and they are actually trying to reclaim their land.
True.
And some of the land here in the United States, preferably pretty much a lot of it.
All of it.
So if they come to gain that land, because they are actually out seeking those rights right now,
Yep.
how would this affect those indigenous Aboriginal people?
So I know that there are some efforts where I personally have worked with some indigenous groups to actually reclaim land and put it into a community land trust. Because while our colonial sort of society has commodified land, a lot of those indigenous communities at least look at our motto and say, wait a minute, you guys are at least holding true to our beliefs that no single individual actually has right to own this land. We collectively should own this land and we should steward it.
Okay.
So there are examples in Oakland, California. There are examples in New Orleans, Louisiana, where those indigenous communities have been successful in reclaiming land and that they've put it into a community land trust.
Wow, awesome.
Yep.
So they're doing that, then you got my vote.
Do we have any more questions?
I'll say, can we get a question answered from somebody on Zoom? I know Tony's got a couple, so you can take the thing.
What happens if the home prices fall 2008? Excellent question. So the great thing is that in the 2008, 2009, no one went underwater. So, and it's primarily because that subsidy that we talk about is pretty much the difference between what that homeowner can afford and what the market is. It can be as small as 45,000. It can be as large as 250,000. But literally in 2008, 2009, none of the CLT homeowners actually saw that their prices were actually below where the market was. That they were still, if they wanted to, and a number of homeowners, especially in the Durham community land trustees, were able to actually sell their resale restricted home and go into the market because those market prices dropped so much that they said, hey, this is my opportunity to now get into the market with not a lot of money down. So that is something that is built into the protection of this model, is that literally we would have had to have seen even a more devastating crash of 2008, 2009 for CLT homeowners to be underwater. And as of right now, I just don't see that forthcoming.
They said the CLT models have been used since back when?
Since 1968.
68. Okay.
I like the community land trust model because it removes possibility of for-profit banks from sucking wealth out of communities. I would also say not just bank, but also investors. Through front-loaded interest on mortgages, how does financing for potential homeowners in a CLT situation? So one of the things that we as a movement, as a model, needed to come to grips with, and that is that we needed to still play within inside of the mortgage industry. So that is something that we have now been embraced by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are the two largest secondary market enterprises here in the United States. And they have created mortgage products that are for community land trust. It is something that you will see from time to time in other housing models like mobile home parks. All of those mortgages are very different because of the housing type and because of the split ownership. That is the same way that those two, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, were able to create a community land trust mortgage product that is now available to anybody, any of the banks that actually are partnered with them.
When did that take place? When did that inception occur? With Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac?
So Freddie Mac just came on board, I want to say in 2019.
Okay.
Fannie Mae has been with us for about close to 10 years now.
Okay.
Sir?
Thank you. Very informative. Cost of money going up, the effort to control inflation, what impact, if any, will that have on the CLT model?
It's a great question. So inflation has hit all of us, and the CLTs are no different. Every time that we work with CLTs, one of the things that we continue to hear is that their buyer pool, because of inflation and because of the interest rates, a lot of their homeowners are just now not able to actually purchase that home because the interest rates grew. When the pandemic was happening and we saw interest rates for mortgages around like 2%, 3%, a lot of CLTs were moving a lot of families into home ownership, because now, just based on the interest rate now going up to 6 and 7, a lot of those families just don't have the buying power to be able to buy the CLT home. Now, that creates a policy issue where some of the CLTs need to go back to the government and say, hey, we need more subsidy, because these families are just not able to afford this mortgage just based on the interest rate. When it comes to construction, about a year ago, we saw a number of CLTs not be able to really start their construction projects due to the high cost of the materials. Some CLTs were able to get the government to put more money into their projects so that they could get started. Other CLTs would had to wait until the actual products get a little bit cheaper. And now, luckily, most of it is back to normal, but most CLTs are paying a premium for those products. What we're trying to do on a national level is figure out, are there other construction methods and materials that can be a little bit cheaper. So then we still get the high quality that we want, but we don't have to pay the premium for it.
Thank you. So is the CTL the lender? And if so, do they look at the individual's credit like a traditional lender would look at?
Yeah, so the Community Land Trust will work with all of the traditional lenders. So from the PNC banks to the Fifth Third banks, they will use mortgage products that are blessed by Fannie and Freddie Mac, but a lot of those same guidelines do exist, where you have to have a debt to income ratio of a certain percentage. Your income has to match a certain amount. One of the things that is being pushed on the federal level is the fact that there are now what's called special purpose credit, products out there. And those products are to help get more lower income individuals into home ownership by tweaking some of these percentages to actually make more homeowners a reality.
Okay, and you mentioned wealth building, generational wealth building. I'm also thinking about legacy building. So is assumption an option that a household would be able to utilize? Because if they don't qualify, if the original homeowners say died out, then their family members would have to purchase the home and go through the standard process.
So with inside a community land trust, the land trust is willable to their heirs. So the home can be passed down. The challenge with most of that is the heir would have to make that their primary residence. So, if they want mom and dad's house, guess what? You got to give up your house and move in to mom and dad, or you can just sell it to another low income household.
But it would be assumable at the rate that the, say the parent.
Yeah, I mean, as long as the parent has the right sort of estate planning in place, the ground lease actually encourages that, because we want this asset to be passed down to the next generation.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
Hi, thank you for your presentation this evening. Malala Kennedy, City of Indianapolis.
Oh, cool.
I noticed on the map in your presentation, there were like 6 or so states that were in white that I would assume are the states that do not have the CLTs.
Correct.
Why is Indiana one of those states, and how do we change that? What's the stumbling block?
So yeah, so it's interesting because just about 4 weeks ago, I was actually in Iowa, and Iowa is another state that doesn't have this model. And I think the best thing that I could say is that change is hard. Doing something different is scary. And for policymakers, if something has worked so well, why try to fix it? And that's at least the sentiment that I got from Iowa, from elected officials, that I did a presentation, I had a real conversation with them, and one of the city council presidents basically said, why in the world are we one of the last? And they basically and their colleagues were like, are you kidding me? We don't like to step out of doing anything innovative here. And so to me, I feel like some policymakers just don't want to fail. And this right here can seem really risky. When you can just do a down payment assistance grant and just allow that money to be forgiven, great, go ahead, that's great. But when we present and when we try to talk to policymakers and figure out what are some additional policies that would help support this model, there's sometimes not the political will to be able to get it done. And then unfortunately, you are just stuck in doing things that have sort of worked previously for now hundreds of years. So I wish I had a better answer, but it's to me, that's been my experience with working in states where it's like, yeah, you guys, and honestly, for your state, you'll be the second. South Bend, Indiana, they've started their community land trust this year. So.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the process of selecting like the streets or the neighborhoods that these homes would be a part of?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It all depends on where the community is. So again, our founders were very clear that this should not be government run. This should not be government driven. This has to be community driven. It has to be the residents that are going to step up and say, hey, I want to be involved. I want to sit on the board. I want to be a member. And that's what's going to drive where this possible community land trust could go. Right now, the initial plans is to look at a citywide structure where this community land trust can work in any place within inside the city. And now we know that there's probably some strategic areas where it makes sense to start. But again, those are all conversations that still need to be unpacked and still need to be decided on. But it's really up to the local folks here. And I'm very clear that one, I have no development interest in this state or in this city. I just come and present a model. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, it's okay. It's not going to hurt my feelings.
Okay, quick question. Well, if you, okay, say like, what is some of the general areas around here in Indiana that you're looking at? And also, if you're already a homeowner,
Yes.
okay, actually a home that I built 20 years ago, I actually just sold that home last year in October, and less than 3 months later, I turned around and bought another home. I closed on it and bought another home. I actually got outbid it twice because it was crazy last year.
Yep.
And then I turned around and bought another home this past January because I downsized to a one-story. If I thought about it 20 years ago, I would have turned around because, I'm 54 and I turned around like, I want to turn around and just give me a one-story. If I thought about it then, I would have bought such a big house and at least a master bedroom on the first floor. But I didn't think about it back then. You think big, you're like, yeah, I just want a big house, and have children. But now I adopted all three my children, and now they're all gone at home. They all graduated and moved away. So no, my dog died in June. So so now I'm home alone. So now I just wanted the one story and everything on one floor. So now I just got one level. But if I did a community, what about a person that's already a homeowner? Do you get, or is it like, what do you do with a person like that, or whatever? How do you get involved?
Yeah. It's a great question. So let me be clear, because this has actually been a little bit distorted in a number of other communities I go to. One, this community land trust is not asking for anybody, and I'll say this again, anybody that owns your current home, that you would put your land into our community land trust. That's not the model. The model is to really work on some blighted communities, pick up some properties, vacant properties around those types of things. So where current homeowners play a really important part is that you already are invested in your community in a certain way. So why not become a member of the community land trust? Why not think about sitting on the board of directors? Why not sort of helping to advocate so that we can get more resources from the city of Indianapolis into this model? Because you know that if there can be a vacant lot in your community. And there could be two things that could happen to it. An investor can come along and build another large house. And if he builds it and he sells it for a lot of money, that's actually going to affect your property. Your property is going to increase, which some folks might be like, all right, cool, my property increased. But let's also remember, the increase of values in homes also affects your taxes.
It does.
So there's a fine balancing act that we need to make sure that, you know, we're improving our communities while at the same time still being able to stay in our communities. And sometimes that means that there needs to be a mix of different housing. It all can't just be market. You want to sprinkle a little bit of affordable housing in there to keep things balanced. So I would say for current homeowners that are, you know, looking at this model and saying, wow, this is a great model. Hey, how can I get involved as become a member? Think about joining the board. Think about how else you can advocate for this type of model. Now, when the community land trust gets up and gets started, one of the programs that it may start to adopt is for current homeowners that may not have family to leave a legacy to. Maybe you want to put in your will that your property gets put into the community land trust after you're gone, so that it can actually help another family. But again, those are programs that are too premature right now to talk about, but it's what other CLTs have been able to do, is work with, you know, some families that are like, wait a minute, my family's always been in this community, but I'm maybe the last generation. Where else would my family's legacy go? Maybe into a community land trust. As we talk about, and I just want to be very clear, Grounded Solutions Network is here to do the presentation of the knowledge of sort of laying out what the model is. There is not a like secret plan of where this is going to be started and everything else. Those things, we at Grounded Solutions, we have a very distinct model of you drop knowledge, you figure out who wants to get involved, and then it's those individuals that can be a part of those discussions about where we start, how big it's going to get, where we're going to go, and all of those things. So.
You talked about the property that's on the south side, that 17,000 acres of land.
The 17 acres, again, we're not sure.
What are your plans?
We're not sure.
Okay, we got plans.
See.
I'm telling you, we got plans.
And that's what, and that's what it means to
We've
be.
been talking to senators and everything, so we got plans.
See, and that's what it means to be about community.
We got a vision. We already got stuff mapped out. So if you need somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
I leave that up to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I got one question.
What mystery is there? No. So the young lady that provided food, she's project lead, our goal is to whatever we're doing, it's gonna be done in conjunction with community. So it's a vision at the beginning stages. We're holding, so okay, we talk about open house. There's an open house on Tuesdays, 12 to 4, Thursdays, 12 to 4. And we want community folks to come say, here's what we're thinking, here's our vision. So some of 2856 South Meridian. So the skinny answer is that we're gonna do this the same way Kevin's involved with the CLT model, the same way we plan to do our community wealth building with the property we acquire.
The hardest one of the night for me. I do a lot of data research. That's my field.
Okay. We love data.
Okay, so I don't know how informed people are, but it's concerning to me because Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac was involved in subprime mortgage lending schemes back in the day.
Yep.
Okay,
They both
and so
were.
we want to know what kind of protections are afforded to the people that are, coming forth to try to help build this here in the city. What kind of protections are afforded to these people to make sure that this is not something that's going to happen again, or that we have to be concerned with their actions of their leadership and integrity?
That's right. That's right. You're absolutely right. And it's a great question because it again sells why the community land trust is so important, is that any individual homeowner is going to be looking over documents. And as a first-time homeowner, and I was one long time ago, you got stars in your eyes. You don't know what half the freaking things mean. You're just like, give me a pen. Let me sign, let me sign, let me sign. You're ecstatic. You're in the zone. You're already trying to figure out what furniture you're going to pick out. But the great thing about the community land trust is the fact that you're going to have a team that's going to sit down with you, in addition to probably your legal counsel that you should be bringing to the table to make sure that you're protected. You're going to have another team that's there to help protect you. And they're going to review that mortgage document in the same way that I reviewed the refinance document and said to that homeowner, I'm sorry, I can't accept this. So the community land trust goal is to make sure that you're in a 30-year fixed rate mortgage that is amortized. That we want to make sure that your housing cost outside of insurance and taxes are as consistent as possible over those 30 years. That's going to be up to the community land trust to ensure that that happens. Because God forbid, if we give you the ability to get a mortgage, and let's say 5 years go by and then all of a sudden something new pops up, then guess what? The community land trust is failed. And that's why we say we're going to give you a 99-year ground lease that's beyond your 30-year mortgage, just to make sure that you and your family are protected in having the full rights to the land and to enjoy it. So.
One quick sort of aspect that I don't think has been covered, which of course, let's save it for last. You said government has a role to play, and certainly at the local level, there can be a lot of influence on the activities that occur with local government administrations as a partner. And to that point, things change, even if the next administration is the same current administration, but new faces and that sort of thing. Policies can change and switch, and promises that were made or about affordability or things like that, equity, can be broken out of political expediency. I'm just wondering if you have any advice and from your experience about about the accountability piece and whether or not this kind of CLT model affords an opportunity for maybe some other community organizing.
Yeah, so community organizing is what's at the heart of this model. You want to make sure that again, we talk about political will, and political will can cut both ways. It can do some amazing things, and I've seen some amazing efforts throughout the entire country. But I've also seen sometimes political will start to falter. And that's when you need to make sure that as residents, as citizens, that you're holding your elected officials accountable. Because they are there as representatives of you. And that's what's incredibly important about any CLT effort, is that we can get as many residents to come in on the ground floor with us to talk about these things. And we'll invite government in, because we want to make sure that we're not creating something that they can't support. But if there can be a win-win, then there should be no excuse why government shouldn't stand in back of this. On some of the federal level, Grounded Solutions Network is continuing to advocate that within inside of HUD, that there's actually a program that's dedicated to community land trust. Because we want funding not to just go through home, not to just go through CDBG, but we actually want a program of our own.
Okay, can everybody please put your hands together for Mr. Jason Webb? Wonderful program. A lot of great information, a lot of great information. If anybody that wants to become involved, if you want to be an advisor, you want to be part of this process, the program, become a homeowner, any aspect of it, then you can log on to this, the QR code, and it'll take you to the site and you can sign up from there, as well as your survey will be there about how you felt about the training tonight. So again, any other announcements, anybody? No? Okay.
Give.kepler.org/Octavius. Help us get that 17 acres up off the ground. And come see us tomorrow.
One more time, Daryl.
Yes, give.kepler.org/Octavius with an S. So Octavia with an S.
Yeah, give.kepler.org. Yes, that works too.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a safe evening. Thanks for coming. Good night.
Thanks to all the wonderful people on Zoom for joining us. Appreciate you tuning in. Hope you join us tomorrow, 5 to 8 p.m. Same time, same wonderful place. Y'all have a great night.